Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 news. The first 2025 car we see in the flesh is the brand new McLaren, launching their car at Silverstone today, not with a new livery. That will wait for a few days time, but the car was on the track. The front suspension, the rear suspension, massively different to what we are seeing last year. Many are calling this a very extreme interpretation of the car, but the front and rear wings, they look exactly the same. There are brand new elements that will still arrive to this car in the future, but early indications show McLaren have taken some risk with their new model. Is it going to pay off? Lando and Oscar seem to be especially confident. Very much interested in your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I greatly appreciate it. We're going to go through absolutely everything today. Starting right about here, this is Max's new helmet design for the new season, kind of inspired by what he used to use back in the day when he was karting. Thought that was kind of nice. There's also this confirmation on the day in terms of the order in which I believe they will be running things. I think the plan is going to be on the evening of, the 18th of February in a few days' time when they reveal all the cars. Now, our understanding is it won't actually be the cars, it'll just be the liveries, but all the teams have been told you cannot show the livery until the launch night in a few days' time. Apparently, the plan is going to be to do it in effectively reverse championship order. So basically, Kick Sauer will start off the evening, then it will go Williams, RB, Haas, Alpine. I think that's going to be the plan anyway, up through the grid until McLaren are the final car to, be shown and do their spiel and all of that type of stuff. So Red Bull will be third last, Ferrari will be the penultimate one, and then it goes to the McLaren. Whether they actually are going to wheel out their car, just because if you've already shown the new car, you might as well show it with the new livery on, you might think. Most other teams will probably show either just a show car or last year's car with the new livery. That'll probably be the plan. Maybe McLaren will do the same thing and we really will get to see it when it arrives in Bahrain. But we got lots of information on it today, lots of screenshots, loads of pictures, loads of analysis that we're going to get into. Ferrari are doing another thing, by the way. They obviously don't want F1 themselves to steal all the thunder. Ferrari are doing their own car launch on the day after the F1 75 event at Fiorano with both of their drivers. And they're even going to do a driver's presentation on the 6th of March in Milan. Pretty interesting, right? Just because they go to Bahrain for testing over the end of February, then back to Italy for a couple of weeks, then they go to Australia for the starting race. So it's going to be a hectic start to the season. But let's talk about the McLaren, because today the report started to emerge that we were going to see a Formula 1 car today, a brand new Formula 1 car for the new season. And apparently it was going to be the McLaren. I saw yesterday we talked about the dates that the teams were going to announce their cars, and just as I uploaded yesterday's video, I saw something saying that McLaren, they did a bit of a teaser saying they were going to do something today, and people were like, what are they going to do a bit of hype for some of the sponsors that they have? I don't know. I don't think many were expecting them to show their actual car, because it's not really been talked about at all. But they did a similarly surprise livery reveal last year, so maybe it's not a massive surprise. They've dropped the same thing this year, and we're going to see some of the pictures in a second. Before we get there, some of the comments from the drivers. We discussed yesterday Lando Norris's ambitions to win this year's championship against certainly Max Verstappen, and how he needs to approach things to give himself the best possible chance of doing so. And Lando recognises that his performance last year was at times less than stellar, and he knows that he has to straddle the gap to some degree. But I think certainly his first couple of sentences, or his first sentence here, actually it's only one sentence, but you know what I'm saying, first couple of clauses imply what I want Lando to do and what I feel like he needs to do. Whether he will execute on his words, that's another question, but this is what he says. I need to get my elbows out and I need to show him, Max, that I'm not going to willingly give him any positions and those kind of things. But I also have to be a smart driver. You have to be a smart driver to go up against Max. I think both of those things are probably fair, but as I said yesterday, it's about gaining that on-track respect that is often necessary, otherwise you're going to get pushed around a bit. But Lando's not wrong. You're not trying to take out Max or risk yourself being taken out necessarily unless the championship situation compels that to happen. Lando also mentions that people are talking about who's the favourite. Is it Max? Is it Lando? Those are certainly the two bookies' favourites. We don't know how the Red Bull car is going to fare. At the end of last season, they came back reasonably well. But still, Max went on, a winless spree is something that we haven't seen in a very, very long time for him. So Lando says, though, I don't think Max is going to just be the guy. I think it's going to be everyone, right? So, of course, we have George Russell in the background of this shot. Whether Mercedes can get in the mix, that's a question mark. But I think Lando isn't wrong to say, look, it's not me versus Max, it's me versus Oscar, me versus Lewis versus Charles, and maybe even versus Russell, potentially Antonelli, Lawson, doubtful, even if he does well in the car. We know how Red Bull tend to go with Max in charge of that team, and of course Max is stronger than, well, pretty much every driver you could put him alongside. Oscar, though, he wants to go for it as well. He made the statement today, I think that I can become world champion this year. Clearly there's lots of optimism at McLaren that their extreme car philosophy and design ideas are going to take them in the right direction. Whether Oscar is consistent enough in qualifying, I think that's probably the thing that holds him back the most. In terms of executing, he's usually pretty good, although towards the end of the year he did have a few stinkers, which didn't really add to his reputation that much. But we know that he's, when he's in a position to win, he is excellent at capitalising for a young driver. So that's something that Lando will have to think about, but equally, I don't think Lando will be too concerned about the battle with his own teammate. I think Lando feels the battle will be elsewhere if he performs at the level that he knows that he can. But speaking of that, we've got to talk about the car. This is the MCL 39, the brand new McLaren for the new season. There it is, just about on screen. Here they are at Silverstone today, showing off the car for the first time in a surprise way. Now, this is the livery they're running. Of course, no sponsors on it. It's actually really good. It looks really cool. Unfortunately, this will not be anything like what the car actually looks like in the actual livery, because they're going to have the sponsors on it and they can't show the livery yet anyway, what they're actually going to do, because it's being reserved for a few days' time in London. So they've come up with this livery just to put it on the car, to take it out to the track and drive it around a little bit. Get Lando in the car, get Oscar in the car, do a bit of filming, do a bit of a promotional day, bit of a shakedown, they usually call it. Wet tyres on, because, it's Silverstone. It's always going to be raining at this time of year, it seems, when they do this type of stuff. But this is the brand new car. These, by the way, are the brand new race suits. And actually, this is really fire. They tweeted these out and said, stealth mode or something, right? So I like what McLaren have done today. They've started off the year in a pretty nice way, I would say. And there's loads of shots of these cars. And obviously, we'll go through some of the comparisons, because everyone really wants to compare this year's car to last year's car. What's different? Where have they been more aggressive? Where have they made changes? I imagine a fair few of the changes we can't see. Redesigned floor has been said that's obviously, every team is going to have redesigned their floor to some extent. That may be where the critical changes are, who knows. But there are still some critical changes that we can see, and we'll get to in a second. So these were some of the images. Here is another one. This doesn't look great. I mean, okay, I say that because you can't see certain elements here. And I think Sky Sports, who put this out, have cranked the saturation up to 1 million. So you almost can't tell some of the definition on the sidepod. What you can see, though, is the rear suspension. And that's kind of critical. But also the shape of the sidepod and actually the engine cover. If you look at that engine cover, that is a Ferrari engine cover as far as I'm concerned. And we know that Ferrari dealt with that and developed that kind of size and style of engine cover to help their aerodynamic efficiency. That is seemingly something that McLaren have also adopted. And there are plenty of ideas on this car from McLaren, but also from Red Bull, from Mercedes even, and at least in that element, I would say from Ferrari as well. This is another shot here, and I think this is, well, just a couple of images. There is a couple of comparison shots I'll get to here in a second. This is another one that's been floating around, just comparing the front suspension geometry. So you can't exactly fully see it here, but these two what do you call them, rods or whatever, of the front suspension, the angle that they make between them. So this one here my cursor is, and this one here my cursor is. The angle that creates on the pull rod front suspension determines the level of anti-dive in the car's front suspension, which is when the car brakes, how much does it lurch and lean forward, and how much does the suspension geometry prevent that from happening. This was a critical component of these set of regulations. Adrian Newey spent basically all of his time when these regulations were first announced in 2022, or at least working towards those regulations, designing the suspension, and Newey built into the Red Bull, the RB20 or the RB18 as it was back then, the anti-dive suspension geometry, which has now become standard across the grid. And there's reasons for that we'll get into in a second. Mainly it's about maintaining a solid, stable aerodynamic platform so the floor can do its work. It has its downsides, and they come in terms of front tyre wear and front tyre warm-up, but also in terms of driver feel. It's been a problem for certain drivers. So McLaren, though, are taking this to the absolute extreme. I mean, if you guys look at the angle there, this is the one you're looking at. It's more extreme than they had last year, and it's probably more extreme than anything we have seen so far in these regulations, which is interesting because everyone Newey knew from day one, but every other team knew into 2022 that anti-dive front suspension was a necessity of these regulations. And we've seen teams adopt that and get more and more extreme on that over time. But now McLaren have taken it to a new level. Like when you look at the angles there, you can really see it. It's, it's more substantial to the eye than I think we've ever really seen before in these regulations. This is Piastri, by the way, getting into the car. This is a nice angle as well because you can really see the side pod inlets, basically. So they appear to be, well, it's an overbite design. We know that teams have messed around with that over the last few years. The underbite, the overbite, how should it be? What should these sidepod inlets look like? How much, how big do they need to be? What should the shape be? Because you guys can clearly tell there's a big undercut here, right? It's still an undercut below the sidepod, but the shape of the sidepod is actually more similar to what maybe a Mercedes or even a Ferrari have been rocking with, certainly towards the rear of the sidepod. It's not like as obscenely undercut as the Red Bull has moved towards over the last couple of years. So I do find it fascinating how there's clearly loads of ideas that McLaren have taken from all sorts of angles. But yeah, this is a pretty good vision really of the new McLaren. Certainly the way the side pods are being designed currently. This is a bit of a side-by-side shot, and I think the main thing to note here is the side pod. This is last year's side pod. Yeah, sure, there's an undercut, but last year's McLaren side pod was very much like a Red Bull, very, slim side pod. It's all about the undercut, the air channeling underneath it. Whereas you can tell that this year, especially the way that it ends at the back, it is a different design. And whether that's going to be the final design is a question, right? I mean, this is a car that is not on the track yet officially for the first time. We'll see that in Bahrain in due course. And we know that the cars they reveal here are not necessarily the cars that they will actually drive. There will be upgrades arriving. There will be plenty of elements on this car that they've planned that they've not revealed today. But there are elements that are different. The inlet of, the ovula, if you want to describe it as that, inlet of the air intake, that's pretty interesting. And I think the main thing in this image really, because this is a pretty good comparison really, in terms of the angle of the shot, is the side pod. You guys can see the MCL38 from last year, how high it appears to be. Obviously the colours are different, but you can quite clearly tell how, the airflow certainly at the back lower side of the side pod is different in terms of airflow to what it has been before. So I think that's pretty interesting. And the features of the floor are also different. How different they're going to be, how different it looks under the car. Those are the other main questions of the day. The big thing, though, that everyone is talking about really are the inlets and the side pods, and we saw those, how last year they were kind of rectangular, and we saw them from Oscar Piastri's picture a second ago, that this year they are, well, they do come down a little bit more than they did before. I know that people have kind of looked at them as if it's kind of like a Mercedes style one, and it depends on the images you use exactly how this looks. You guys know that Mercedes are rocking with something like this at the start of last season. They then calmed that down a bit, but it seems McLaren could be doing something similar. But it depends. The side pod that we see today might be different to the side pod they actually turn up with. The airbox inlet is now bigger, and it's larger and more horizontal and ovular than it was before. And I know that people are comparing it even to the 1997 Jordan. I think there was some comparison here to say, yeah, this is the 97 Jordan car, and this is what McLaren are rocking working with. You don't usually see that style all that often, so that's why there was talk about it. But the main thing is this, right? So this is your anti-dive suspension. What's interesting about this is that, as I say, drivers, especially the likes of Lewis Hamilton, are not really a massive fan of this because he likes to get on the brakes and feel the car and feel how much front grip the tyres are going to have at the front. But if it's no anti-dive, as in the car isn't lurching forwards, you don't really get a sense of that. So the car needs to be designed in a way, because this is a very fast car, theoretically. This is the fastest way to do it. But if your driver doesn't have confidence in their own particular style, and, you know, okay, Hamilton is really good on the brakes and very much likes that feeling under braking. Other drivers may brake earlier and therefore have a different feel. But fundamentally, every driver needs that kind of feedback to some degree. The anti-dive doesn't necessarily help with that, but they can help it elsewhere. I think that's some of the talk, that McLaren, it seems, are willing to go even further than they went before because they believe they can, you know, make the car faster and make up for some of the potential negatives in some of their other design ideas. The nose does look a bit different, to be fair, so that is also a talking point as well. And look, Gary Anderson at the race was talking about it in some length. The main thing that people are discussing really is this front and rear suspension geometry. Talk about the fact that these ideas are designed to optimize the aerodynamic package. The overall increase in anti-dive using the top wishbone will achieve that while critically still giving the driver a reasonable feel for the braking potential of the front tyre. So that's the idea anyway. The track rod is separated from the bottom wishbone, as in highlighted is in yellow, as you guys can see here. And McLaren is still using a pull rod front suspension, as we know. And this was then the shot of the rear suspension, which is, again, difficult to really analyze in great detail, and discussing how they've gone for a similar thing in terms of increasing the anti-lift of the rear suspension, but again making a couple of geometry changes to potentially mitigate some of the downside to that. So it seems like they're going aggressive, right? We talked about the McLaren being an extreme approach and all that. Of course, we don't really know what that's going to look like. This is the talk as well about the engine cover at the back of the car, how last year's and this year's one now look, you know, decidedly different, at least so far. But and there's also changes elsewhere. We looked at these ones earlier. So that's pretty much where we are. I know that Auto Racer did their analysis on it as well. They made some interesting assessments actually further down about how the push rod rear suspension has interesting elements that Red Bull have used in recent years, and it's like a standard Red Bull feature that they, it seems, are now deploying as well. Maybe it makes sense because, as they describe, lots of the McLaren guys, Rob Marshall among others, used to work for Red Bull. So yeah, it's all fascinating, this stuff today, and we have lots of analysis that I'm sure will continue to be done over the coming days. The reality is, we don't know what this is going to look like in terms of performance on the track. The team feels very confident about it, it seems. Lando Norris was not saying, oh yeah, the car's rapid, we're going to win everything, but he said, you know, the car felt fine, it was fine. So, you know, obviously they want to keep their cards to some degree close to their chest. But we can see some interesting developments here today. We're going to see some more cars in the coming days as well. But more than likely, it is going to be until Bahrain testing where we properly see what the other cars look like, and also what the McLaren looks like when it has more updates on it. Because I'm sure that this car they drove today is not the current version they're working on. It is a fundamental version that probably was designed a very long time ago. They have had several rounds of upgrades and updates since then. When they arrive to Bahrain, I imagine they'll have more parts they want to fit to the car as well. So this is what Stella says. This is the car we'll have for testing, but we will have first upgrades very soon. We have chosen an ambitious approach. And I think there's no doubt about that when you look at some of the imagery from today. So very much intrigued to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. When are we going to see our next Formula 1 car? But it does feel like in some respects we are back, you know, like the off season, the winter break is over, and all of the things that have happened behind the scenes. Today is our first kind of recognition that yes, they have been building some cars, and this is the first one. So very much intrigued to your thoughts. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.